So many of my peers across the country will say, what do you do? What's your secret? And the problem is it's not sexy. I take care of my customers. I do client reviews. I explain to them what they're invested in and why, and help them determine where they're going and show them how they're getting there and what their cash flow is going to look like in retirement, and wash, rinse, repeat. And my gosh, the depth of loyalty that you get from people when you do that, it's amazing what comes to you when you're taking care of people.
Welcome back to another episode of Good Work. I'm your host, Barrett Brooks. On this show, I interview world-class people about why our work matters and how your work can help you become the person and the leader you were made to be. My goal is to do the research necessary to ask questions my guests have never been asked so that they can tell their stories in a way they've never been told. For you as a listener, I hope these stories will inspire you to find work that matters and to make a positive impact on your family, your community, and the world at large. My guest today is Ann Brooks, or as she's more popularly known to, me, Mom. I first floated the idea of having Mom on the show in one of the early episodes. I think it was with Anne-Laura Lecoumphe, and felt like the time was right to have her on the show. My mom's had an exceptional career as a salesperson, as a leading high-performing sales teams for great organizations, and as an entrepreneur. First as an insurance agency owner, and now as a financial advisor. There's two things that I think you're going to get out of this episode. The first one is leadership and life advice from a woman who's been the primary breadwinner for her family her entire adult life. Her work at Xerox, Hayworth, and Allstate over almost 40 years has given her a perspective on managing for performance, building team culture, and creating systems that scale. The second thing I hope you'll get out of this episode is that for better or worse, you've gotten to know me through the existence of the show. Hopefully, mostly better. I'm a character in the life of this show, and my mom has, for obvious reasons, had a massive influence on me. But that goes so much further than the typical relationship of a mother and son. My mom gave me a massive head start in learning how to build teams, how to lead with integrity, and how to sell in a way that makes everyone involved feel good about the outcome. And I still use so many of those skills today in my business as I build it. So here's my episode with Mom, or Ann Brooks, whichever one you'd like to call her. Let's get to it. Ann Brooks, aka Mom, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So I mentioned this in one episode that I might have you on the show, and I got like 4 or 5 messages from people being like, yeah, you need to do that. So at minimum, we'll entertain people, but I actually think this is going to be much more than that, because you've had an awesome career. Obviously, I've learned so much from you, and I'm excited to get to share you with a bunch of people. Breaking new ground here. Never a podcast before. You've done recordings, but never a podcast before.
That is correct. Yes. I'm a little nervous.
Exciting. That's okay. Lots of people say that, and they say I make them comfortable. So we'll see if I can do my magic on you too. My first question I want to start off with is, I realize I actually don't know the origins of how you became a Georgia Bulldogs fan.
I'm not sure I know the origins of that, to be honest with you, because growing up, your old pa went to Georgia Tech for a period of time. And so we grew up being Georgia Tech fans.
Oh.
And then, which is why I always root for them even now when we're not playing. But then probably when I went off to Georgia, that was my team. So that's probably the origins of me becoming a Georgia fan. Before that, my most ardent support was the Atlanta Braves.
Yes, the plight of that, which we can talk about as well. So you were at Georgia during a really key period. So I lived most of my life in the Georgia Bulldogs. I've been a fan my whole life, which is extremely odd, I realized, once we moved to the West Coast. Like, kids don't run around rooting for college teams mostly outside of the South. Maybe in other
that
parts
is correct, actually.
But in the South, it's very common. So I grew up a Georgia Bulldogs fan, probably more than any other team. And then I went to Georgia as well. I didn't apply to any other college because it was just a foregone conclusion. And this was rooted in how big of a fan you were. But for all of my life, we had never won a national championship until whatever it was, 3 years ago. But you got to see a national championship while you were in school.
Yes.
What was that like?
It was awesome. It's exciting. So I actually was at University of Georgia during two legends' careers. One being Herschel Walker, and of course he's who led us to the national championship. And the other was Dominique Wilkins. What do they call him? The Hue and Highlight film or whatever. Yeah. So it was incredible. I was actually working while the game was being played. Yes. And I worked at a mall. So every few minutes, I would run down to the little electronics store at the end of the mall and watch a little bit of the game. And that's how I watched it.
People my age and younger are thinking, you ran to the electronics store? And it's like, yes, people, there were no cell phones. I don't even know if there was internet back then. There probably wasn't.
Oh, no,
So you went,
no, there wasn't.
You went to the Radio Shack.
I did. It actually wasn't the Radio Shack, but it was something similar. They were probably on the radio if I really thought about it, but I didn't have a radio there. So yeah. That was it.
I want to talk about the mall thing eventually, but you are probably one of the biggest sports fans I know, maybe in the history of the planet. And that makes you unique for a variety of reasons. But one of them is that for most people that I know, if one of their parents was a big sports fan, it was their dad.
Yes.
And so I have this unique experience with you in a bunch of ways where you are a massive sports fan, and obviously you're my mom. How did you come to love sports so much? And just to put this in context, on any given night, it does not matter what sport is on television. It could be like, if it's the only thing on, it could be D3 field hockey. And if it's the choice between nothing or D3 field hockey, my mother would put D3 field hockey on. Now, it's never gotten to that point because you always manage to find something else. But this is how much of a sports fan you are.
Yes. And the origins would be the Atlanta Braves. I don't know why. And I'm going to take you back in the time machine again, because this was back when there was no cable either. So I had to put it on UHF because they were on TBS. And they were on every night they played. They were on, and I would watch. And sometimes I would sneak back into the living room if they were on the West Coast, and I would watch them when I was supposed to be in bed.
As a kid,
a young kid. And I don't know why. I honestly don't know why. And of course, I played a lot of sports. So yeah,
that's so funny to me. One of the greatest marketing moves of all time was Ted Turner putting every Braves game on TV for people to watch it. That's how they became kind of baseball's America's team in a lot of ways. Certainly across the Southeast, where there weren't a ton of teams and people basically all rooted for the Braves.
I'm not sure. The Cubs may have been the first team to actually do that. Be where a lot of different people could watch them, which is why there's so many Cubs fans around the United States, if you ever wondered that. But yeah, that's exactly what Ted Turner did, because he got like 25 people to the ballpark. So it was important.
And that's because the Braves sucked.
They did.
Forever.
They did.
And so you earned your right to celebrate the 95 World Series and then again recently.
Yes.
So, okay. So I always love to start and just something that kind of like humanizes and grounds folks who come on, and something that really doesn't matter to anyone, but gives a little lens into who you are.
Yeah.
And sports really are a huge part of who you are.
Yes.
But, you go back to childhood and where that all started. And you grew up in a little place called Morrow, Georgia. Mm-hmm. Just give us a sense of what it was like in Morrow when you were growing up as a kid.
So I'll go back even further than that. When I was really young, we grew up in Conley, Georgia, which was
even smaller,
essentially adjacent to Morrow, which is where we met the woman who became our caregiver and housekeeper. She lived next door with her son and daughter-in-law, ended up moving up in the world and moving to Morrow. It was a great way to grow up. It was a wonderful neighborhood, lots of friends. Dad laid us a basketball court in the backyard. And it was good. It was a fun place to grow up. Mom and Dad would have barbecues on Sunday afternoon. People would come over. I remember the house being full of people. When we were growing up, Dad would dress up as Santa Claus at Christmas time. So it was a good way to grow up. Morrow was a good place. I played lots of sports again, marched in the band, lots of activities in school. So I knew a lot of people across a lot of different backgrounds. And it was a good place to grow up. It was fun.
Yeah. Small little town, the closest major city is Atlanta. And
Mhm.
so it's outside of Atlanta, but it's a tiny place, all
Mhm.
things considered.
It is.
And you grew up with a household of girls.
I did.
So your mom and dad had 4 girls. And I wonder, reflecting back, just kind of how that shaped you, having 3 sisters and, you all played sports for the most part. And it was just a very unique household
We did
in that way.
actually all play sports. And a lot of that was because dad didn't have a son. Right. So, and maybe actually reflecting back on the question you asked earlier, maybe that's why I embrace sports so much. I'm the second daughter, so I'm a middle child. I want to please. And dad wanted somebody to do that kind of stuff with. We would go fishing, we would, do different things like that. And so maybe that's part of the origins too. If you were asking each different sister about how all that was, they would each obviously have a different opinion on their relationship to me and growing up. But it was really good. My older sister and I, Carol and I, were very, very close to one another. I always emulated her, wanted to do what she did. Younger sister Lynn being very black sheep from as far back as you can go. So trying to keep her out, actually trying to keep Carol out of trouble too. I did a lot of that. And then Erin will tell you that I was mean to her.
Aaron's the baby.
Yes, Erin's the baby. And it's ironic that she and I probably arguably are the closest now. But it was good. And mom and dad were very, very active in our growing up. They came to all of our sporting events, our band concerts, all of those sorts of things. Dad would travel whenever the basketball team was going somewhere. Everybody wanted to, if dad wasn't at a game, everybody wanted to know why he wasn't at a game. And then we had 2 doors down from us, we had another family, the Murrays. They had all girls and they had 4 girls.
Oh my gosh.
So we would go on vacation together.
8 girls on one vacation.
And sometimes we took friends.
So I think I have a sense of this, but what did your parents do for work? So they were around a lot. They were raising you a lot of sports, kind of like in some ways almost as if y'all had 4 boys, except for you were all girls, is what's funny.
Right.
But what were they doing for work at the time?
So mom was always a nurse. I attribute a lot of my managerial skills to mom. She started out as a scrub nurse in the operating room. And a scrub nurse is just what it sounds like. She's assisting the surgeon while he's doing surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And, over the years, she moved all the way up the ladder and became a director of OR at a couple of different hospitals in the Atlanta area, actually. And then dad never finished college. Mom did, but not till she was in her 50s. Dad, kind of tried to figure out who he was and what he was supposed to be doing. And God bless him, he's got 4 girls. We're poor as we can be when we were young. And an Allstate agent came out to talk to them about life insurance. They bought life insurance, and the guy told dad, he said, you should come work for us. You have the personality to do what I do. And dad went to talk to them, and they hired him, and he had an incredibly successful 35-year career with them.
That's so funny. I didn't know that's how yeah, wow. So I knew he was an Allstate agent. This was kind of like, I think when I entered the picture, he was already an Allstate agent, and that was what he always was. I didn't realize someone came and sold life insurance, and that's how he. Yes. So my grandfather, my mom's mom, is this gregarious, bigger than life character. He's still around, 90 something now. Just like loud, personable. Everyone kind of loves him, except for probably the people who get annoyed by the shtick over and over, which are the people closest to him. And so I think he brought a lot of that to work. I think that was probably why people liked him.
Yeah.
Was he was just easy to get along with, and they found themselves buying insurance from him as a result.
And if somebody came into the office and they wanted to sit there for an hour, he sat there for an hour. What he did, it was his gift. And he passed that gift along to me. And, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but when I took over his business, he said that to me. He said, look, these people have been with me a long time, and I care about them, and you need to care about them, which I would have anyway, but it just put a different different light on that. But yeah, Dad he sat at a drafting table for the state of Georgia Highway Department. And then he worked for a trucking company. He did a lot of things.
Oh, so he was kind of all over.
Yes, before he found his thing.
So, to get a little kind of like origin story of them, here's my understanding of it, and you can kind of fill in the blanks here.
Okay.
So your mom is Mexican-American, 100% Mexican heritage. Her parents, or one of her parents, came over from Mexico. One of them was born here. Okay, so her dad came over. Her mom was born here, but Mexican as well. They lived in San Antonio and kind of grew up in Texas. And so she was very much kind of like first generation born American, or I guess her mom would have been. And then, and definitely had to earn her way in the world, and came up through nursing and learned how to run an OR and everything. Yeah. And then your dad, he went through a lot of tragedy early in life.
He did.
So maybe you could tell that story of just kind of what his experience was like, and then how he ended up in the military out of that.
Well, he ended up in the military out of necessity, but Dad lost his dad at a very young age. And then his mom remarried, and his mom and his stepdad, this is not funny in any way, it's actually very tragic, but died while running bootleg liquor. They were in an accident. Yeah. So it is a terrible tragedy. And she was carrying twins when she passed. And so, Dad was orphaned. And
was the whole family in the car when this happened?
No. And to be honest with you, I don't know those details. Dad may have told me at some point. I don't remember. But he bounced around. His oldest brother was already out. He was bordering on teenager. Maybe Daddy was already a teenager. But after being here, there, and everywhere, he ended up in a boys' home because everyone in his family was poor.
He had a bunch of siblings. So
he did.
He had like a whole family's worth of siblings who were orphaned basically at a relatively young age. And for him, very impressionable age.
Yes. And so the guys went off to the boys' home. The girls went off to the girls' home. And then when he was old enough to leave the boys' home, actually, I think he left the boys' home and he went back to live with somebody else. And then he realized, I got to do something with my life. And he went into the service. But obviously that had such a significant impact on him growing up that way. And you know what's the most amazing thing to me, Barrett, about all of that is how incredibly close he and his siblings were throughout their, still the ones who still are living throughout their lives. They maintained that closeness.
So I go back and grab those origin stories because I think it informs a lot of kind of the environment that you grew up in, right? So you've got this on two working parents, first of all, which wasn't always super common, but probably partially out of necessity. You've got Mexican-American woman who marries your dad, who was orphaned at a young age, had really been through the ringer basically by the time he enters adulthood and certainly parenthood. And they build this family and have 4 girls. And so this is kind of the environment that you grow up in. And by all accounts from all of y'all, you and all my aunts, it's like they did a pretty good job for a long time. They like really poured into you and cared about you and kind of raised up the economic ladder over time. They went from, probably working poor kind of
gosh. I suspect they received government assistance when we were really young. Actually, I want to take a step back and just let folks who are listening to us know, Mom grew up in San Antonio, in a very poor part of San Antonio, in a 2-bedroom home with 3 brothers and a sister.
Wow.
And 1 bathroom. And the boys slept on an enclosed porch. So it really is a tremendous American success story, Mom and Dad. The level of admiration I have for the two of them. And, they have their faults, obviously, and we certainly had plenty of struggles, but tremendous admiration for both of them.
Yeah. It's very much, I've always kind of considered you a pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of person. And I definitely learned that from you. And I think it served me primarily well. And it strikes me that you probably got that from them. I mean, they really did. They didn't have many options. It was like, well, it's either on us or we're not going anywhere. It's kind of remarkable. And they both built great careers. And at some point, though, this kind of fell apart. So they ended up getting divorced. And that's my whole life. They've been divorced.
Right.
But for you, obviously, you experienced that as you were entering your own adulthood. And I wonder what that experience was like, having your parents kind of split up as you were leaving home.
So the interesting part of that is when I look back on it, and even in the throes of it, you can't ever say the marriage shouldn't have happened because, of course, we all exist because it happened.
Right.
But it was probably the marriage that shouldn't have happened, not the divorce, because it's quite a testament to them that they did pour so much into us and taught us so much. And, we all got our education in one form or fashion. And they struggled the whole time. And maybe a lot of that was financial, but they really struggled. They honestly didn't have a lot in common. Mother was perfectly happy to sit on the sofa and read a book. And dad wanted as many people around him as he could, scrounge up to hang out with. So they were, on opposite ends of the spectrum. So I wasn't surprised when it happened. And I was an adult. Your father and I were dating at the time. And it was hard. It was very hard because even though I'm not the oldest child, I tended to be the one that both of them were leaning on in different ways. And that neither one of them knew that, of course. So it was hard. And that's when your dad and I moved to Florida because that, I guess, in a sense, you could say I was running away.
Which is interesting because, we talked about this in our shared kind of stories. And I was actually just listening to a book that's kind of highly recommended in coach trainings. It's called Transitions, 40-year-old book. And it was talking about how sometimes people find themselves living similar stories as their parents at similar times of life. And I realized that when you went away to Florida, it was about the time I went to Portland or came to Portland. And I find that interesting. And I don't think you would have said at the time, based on my understanding of it, that you were running from anything. And I wouldn't have said I was running from anything at the time either. I think I thought I was moving towards things. But now we both look back and I think we both feel like, well, maybe we were kind of running from stuff. Mm-hmm. Before we kind of catch up to you meeting dad, which is a hilarious story. There was this period where you went off to college, you went to Georgia, you studied real estate, insurance?
Real estate.
Okay. You studied real estate, did the sports fandom thing, and you started working relatively early in life. So we'll catch up to where we just left off, which is your parents splitting and meeting dad and everything. But you started working relatively early in life. And I think I remember it's either one of the sisters worked in a candy store and one of you worked in a jewelry store. So which one was you and how did you get started there?
Okay. So the funny thing is both of those were me.
Okay.
I worked in the candy store, ironically called Morrow's Nut House. And Carol, your aunt, worked at Chess King, which was, oh, Lordy, I'm not even sure there's a comparison in today's world, but a pretty disco kind of men's dress shop.
Lord, as they say.
And we were kind of next door to each other. And then I went from the candy store across the hall to the jewelry store. I did the candy store in high school and really the jewelry store too. And all through college, I worked at the jewelry store. And it's funny because I was always busy. I marched in the band. I played in the concert band. I did sports. I did all these things, but I also worked.
Right.
And when I think back on that, I'm not really sure how all that worked out, but it did.
Yeah. You played women's basketball too in high school. Like you had a lot going on. Mm-hmm. And I get the sense that, it's funny looking back, like we can see these things, but it's hard in the moment. Obviously, you don't know that's what's going to happen. But the jewelry store is kind of where the beginnings of sales started, I think. So what did you start to learn there that would become a key part of your career over time?
Management. I mean, I actually went to work for them after I graduated as an assistant store manager, but quickly left when I got a career job. You learned, oh my gosh, a lot. We worked long hours. If you were during Christmas time, the store would open at 9 and it closed at 9. And even actually, I think till 10. And I was there from the time it opened until the time it closed. I did learn sales skills. It was very good. You learned how to nurture customer relationships because you had repeat people who would come in and, every Valentine's Day because they hadn't done a darn thing before they were supposed to. And so probably discipline, keeping to a schedule, understanding sometimes you had to work long hours. And that if you sold and you did it right, you could make money and nobody had to dictate to you how much money you could make within reason, obviously, at that time in that environment. But I would save enough money during breaks, during Christmas and then summers. I had almost all of my spending money for the year for school at college.
Wow. It's interesting as I think about, my two boys, your grandkids growing up, and how much the world has changed, even since I was, a teenager, certainly since you were, and whether there will be equivalents to that by the time they get around to it. I mean, certainly there will be something they can do, but the world has just changed so much that even a lot of what people think about doing as young people is online. It's not like most people want to do what I'm doing right now. They want to be creators of some kind. And I think about the way that a lot of people, you, me, many people I look up to cut their teeth on jobs more like a mall jewelry store, or for me, running a lawn business or whatever. That's like really hard work, a lot of hours, nobody's babying you. You get a lot of responsibility early and people see if you can handle it. And I think it can't be understated the degree to which that shapes you,
It does.
Even just the having to work 12 hours part.
Well, and
There's a lot of people who don't want to work that much now.
It was I was a girl, so I'm wearing heels, like these huge heels, and why, I don't know, but that's what you did. And so, you're standing 12, 13 hours in those things. Yeah, it does shape you. And just like your teenage years and doing the work that you did shaped you, taught you to be an entrepreneur at a very early age, taught me that, okay, if I'm going to work 13 hours, it's not going to be standing in a jewelry store, right? You go to college for a reason. That's part of that. It's good for us. I remember tutoring a young man in high school when I was on the agency, and he was a young Black boy. He was a boy, and he wanted to be a rapper. That's what he was going to do. Didn't sing in the chorus at school or in the choir at church or play in the band. He had no music foundation, but that's what he was going to do. So sometimes you wonder about those things, but there's no replacement for hard work. So I do hope that there is, whatever the version of it is for the boys, that it's there.
Yeah. And I mean, part of what I take away from that is even in art, I mean, artists work harder than a lot of people I know and don't earn much from it. Like you're taking probably the biggest bet in the world on yourself when you're trying to make something that is a form of art, whether it's music, podcast or YouTube channel, writing, poetry, all the different paintings. And you have to get so good at so many things to break through. You look at, like I watch a video of Pharrell mentoring young musical artists and watch him talk about music and the way that he thinks about it and all of the little things I've never even noticed, let alone like thought in detail about with how a song is constructed or a chorus or whatever. And you realize, oh, this man has mastered this craft. And it's not an accident that therefore he's very well known for it, but I think people miss that sometimes, and there's this whole thing of like, it can get hammered into you, and we'll get to that too. Cause I think I probably have taken hard work too far at times, and it has not always been good for me. So there's an edge, but all the way up to that edge, it's usually a pretty good thing. And it's a necessary ingredient. And I think I learned that from you, but you didn't stay at the jewelry store, obviously, forever. Like you left pretty quickly after you graduated and you got in, was it Xerox that came knocking basically? And you went to work for them. So tell me about that story of how you ended up finding that job and going to work there.
So Xerox there were a number of components. First of all, your Aunt Carol worked there, and she really had a hard time getting in there. And as you well know, even when you were coming out of college, who you know is important in life. And her husband at the time, her husband's brother knew someone at Xerox up in Memphis, because that's where they were living at the time. She did not have the credentials in college. She didn't have anything that would make Xerox even look at her or think she would be successful there. But they hired her because of this man. And of course, she was one of the most successful people they could have hired because she's such a tenacious, hardworking person. So then I come along and she's begging me, come work here. And I didn't want to because I wanted to forge my own path. But she convinced me to interview. Obviously, Xerox was going to interview me because Carol was successful. So they interviewed me, and they actually hired me as a minority. So I was filling a quota.
So as a Mexican American, they were saying, and a woman, I guess, at the time too.
Yeah.
Because that wasn't probably super common.
Yeah.
So just pause real quick the story right here.
Okay.
So for people who hear Xerox now, they're thinking like, Xerox? I mean, do they even have a business anymore? But at the time, what were they in the world?
Oh, they were, I don't know, but they were a very, 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 they're still a successful company. They're not what they were, but they're still a very successful company. And they did actually have good representation of women and minorities, but they were always looking. And of course, what they would tell me later is, it was just fortunate. We would have hired you anyway, but we were able to check boxes.
Yeah.
In addition to that. But I didn't check the right boxes when I was filling all my paperwork out, and they called me to say, you didn't fill your application out correctly. I said, well, what do you mean? Well, you said you were white. I said, well, I am white. He said, well, we thought you were Hispanic. And I said, well, yes, I am. And they said, well, could you change that? And I said, sure, I can change that. But it kind of makes you feel like, okay, now I definitely need to be good at what I do.
So this is an interesting thing. So, there's like genetic testing and then there's lineage. And genetic wise, I'm probably more like European than anything. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But percentage wise, by grandparents, like Mexican is the purest thing in my background. Everything else is kind of like mixed European, basically.
Yeah.
Technically, that means that I should check Hispanic as well, or Latino, or however it pops up in the census and everything. I can't remember right now. But throughout my life, we had this conversation. I don't remember why we had it. I guess I must have just asked, like, what do I put here? And you always told me white. And this is interesting to me. This is like a philosophical thing that you had. And it seems like it was part of how you lived your life too. So just what fueled that for you? Like, why was it that you were inclined to put white, even though you were factually half Mexican?
Because I didn't want to make my way in life as a number, as a filling a quota. And I don't know even that I consciously processed that, to be honest with you.
Yeah. One of the things we've talked a lot about on the show, actually, and you listen to a decent number of them because, mom's always the first fan of anything the kid does, which I'm grateful for, is I've talked about kind of cultural heritage with a lot of different guests. And one of the most fascinating accidents of the show is just how many people that have come on the show also happen to be immigrants. So one of the topics that's come up is the ways in which, as an immigrant, you have to assimilate into a place. And as a part of that process, you lose a part of yourself. You lose a part of your connection to where you come from, what that culture was like, because on some level, society's asking you to. It's like, we're not really sure if we like how different that is. So be more like this. And not explicitly always, right? Just kind of implicitly. And I noticed that about our family is the only time I can ever remember us really getting in touch with Mexican heritage in our family was when we took a trip to San Antonio and we went through a market. And I remember buying these little celebratory eggs. I think they were for Easter, and they were colored eggs. They had tissue paper on top and confetti in the middle.
Yes.
And they were meant to be broken.
Yep.
And it was like a Mexican celebration thing. And even now when I talk about it, I don't even fully know what it was. I just know that was the one thing I could remember ever talking about our Mexican heritage.
Wow.
And I just find that so interesting, right? That like, obviously it's a part of where we come from.
Right.
And yet, our family like rejected it on some level. Like you and your sisters didn't even speak Spanish, even though that was your mom's language originally.
And mom still speaks it.
Yeah.
I mean, she could speak it conversationally. So I'm going to tell you a story. And I've told you this story. When my Uncle Lewis, who spent his whole life in San Antonio, very successful man, turned 80, we went out there to celebrate his 80th birthday with him. And my aunt hired a mariachi band. Like a real mariachi band. Do you know what that is? Because I would remember
this. Yes.
Yeah.
It's like a 4-person band, right?
Well, yeah, that
Mexican
probably doesn't have to be 4, but yes. And they're playing, and I watch all of my aunts and my aunt's cousins and all these older people dancing and singing with this band. And I looked over at my sisters and I said, this makes me sad
Mm,
that when these people are gone, this is a part of our heritage that's kind of gone. And we ended up talking to a couple of people in the band. And one of the people was very young, but the rest of the band members were older. And he was, of course, the son of one of the band members. And he said, it's dying. We won't have mariachi bands at some point. It's just dying. But I never consciously rejected heritage, I guess. It just wasn't something we were able to immerse ourselves in. Maybe that's why I like Mexican food so much.
probably. Yeah. Or at least partly,
Yeah.
I think that it takes a real sense of stewardship to keep it alive. So we're recording this weeks before it comes out, but it's Chinese New Year today. So, on our side, we've got Mexican heritage, European heritage. And then on my wife's side, Nicole, we've got Chinese, Malaysian, Singaporean heritage. And so we celebrate Chinese New Year with the kids. And first thing Everett, my oldest son, woke up and said today was, Happy New Year, Dada. And I love that. We went back to Singapore for my first time ever that I've been, my wife's first time back in 15 years last year. And I really want to go like every other year because I want our kids to feel like that's a part of their life. That if they were to move there, study there, travel there on their own, that it feels like a part of them, not like it's this foreign place that once upon a time my mom lived, And I think that's partially based in my experience with this. Like I have this longing for a connection to that culture that I can formulate it now as an adult, but it's not the same as if we had made it a part of our lives. Like if Mima, your mom, had really felt like it was part of her job to help us understand where we come from. I'll just never get that part back, right? And you won't either.
No.
But we can foster it now. And so like you and your sisters made a tradition of starting to make tamales every year, for example, as a part of kind of rejuvenating some of this connection to it. And so I think it's still important to go back and recover some of that.
Yeah, it is. And particularly when you lose those people that was the connection to it. I definitely agree with that. And I think in terms of we would go see them, on a vacation, we all pile into the Volkswagen, the station wagon, and we go to Texas and stayed in that house with the 2 bedrooms because my granny died in that house. I mean, my mother grew up there and my granny died there. And we would go and we would stay. And I don't even remember who would sleep in the bed with me, but me and one of my sisters would be in the bedroom that was adjacent to the kitchen. And I can remember waking up in the morning and hearing mom and granny speaking Spanish in the kitchen, talking.
How weird was that for you? Because that didn't happen at all at home, right?
No, because she didn't have anybody to speak it to. And it wasn't weird to me. It was very soothing to hear it and to just listen to the 2 of them interact because they saw each other so infrequently. And of course, they didn't have the technology then they could call, they could talk. But even then, it was long distance and it cost money.
Yeah, right. It's like episode 4, Anne-Laure Lecumpf talked about how when she speaks in different languages and she visits different places that represent parts of her cultural heritage, that different parts of her personality get more naturally expressed. So I think about that with Mima, like how much of her personality, differed when she was able to be there with her mom in the kitchen, speaking Spanish. And it's just interesting to think about, translating some of these things. Okay. So all of that was a detour from Xerox. No, it's great because it gives context for Xerox calls. And presumably they knew Carol, your sister, was Mexican-American. And so they're like, can you check this box, please? Because it would really help us out.
That's exactly
And you say, okay, fine, but you want to prove yourself.
Correct.
That it's not about just that. It's actually about you being good.
Yes.
So you go to Xerox, storied sales training organization, looking back. Xerox PARC is one of technologists' favorite stories ever. It was like this, skunk works kind of project where they did a bunch of technology development back then. So this is a very well-respected company. They hire very good people and they expect big things from you.
Yes.
So you go to work there. And what's it like when you show up going from jewelry store to Xerox?
Oh, I loved it. It was fun because it was a work culture where There's a lot of people like me, lots of young people coming out of college. We're all going to go, conquer the world, right? But what you really have to do is go knock on doors to small businesses and ask them if they want to buy a copier. And that's what we did. I mean, literally cold call, and you had to turn in these sheets. You're not putting this into a computer. You're turning in these activity sheets. How many cold calls did you do? How many outbound phone calls did you make? It was hard. And I went to work for Xerox at the same time that at the time it was called Japan Inc. Japan Inc. was eating Xerox's lunch. They came in with all these digital. When I say digital, the number on the panel was digital. We're dialing to 99 if you need 99 copies. And that's what I'm having to sell against, much better competition. So it was hard. I mean, it was most certainly hard. And I used to tell people, man, if you can learn to sell in this environment, you can sell. So you start out knocking on doors. When you get good, you go to account manager and, whatever. You can keep going. You can go into management, all those sorts of things. But I was there twice. So the first go around, I was there 5 years. Yes, that's right. Your dad and I were married when mom and dad divorced because that's when your dad and I decided to move to Florida, which is when I did transfer with Xerox, but then shortly after I changed.
Went to work at another company.
Yeah.
All right. So let's pause there for a moment. So those first 5 years, you were just a salesperson or were you leading teams?
Just a salesperson.
Okay. So you were cutting your teeth in sales.
Yep.
Sales is a really hard job for anyone who's never done it. I just want to be very direct about that. If you want to learn how to run a business, you should go do sales for someone first, is a thing that I believe. And I'm very thankful for everything I learned from you. And then I think everything I've done, I've always taken a sales mindset, even though the idea or the stereotype of sales I hate. And so I've always tried to find, and I think I learned this from you too, ways to sell that don't feel like I'm making people do things they don't want to do. Because that is the ick factor, right? Is using tactics to make people do a thing they don't want to do. It's like, well, yeah, now you don't have integrity. But that's not what most of sales is if you're actually good at it. And so this is the chapter that you're in at Xerox, is going from selling candy to selling jewelry to now you're selling copiers. And it is funny because that's the mission they sell you, right? It's like, let's go change the world. And then it's like, here's your spreadsheet of people to call. Printed spreadsheet, by the way, not an actual spreadsheet. And you're turning in your dial for dollars record. And that's the job day in and day out. And there are still jobs like that in software. And I think there's a lot of, well, in many fields, obviously, but like in my background, software now. And so many people rage against that expectation. It's like, I don't want to have to do it like that. This is hard. And it's like, yeah, that's why people get paid well for it. And that's also why if you want to do something meaningful in the future, you got to learn some of these skills. And, I'm talking to a younger version of me partially because I rejected it for a while and I paid the price for it. It's why partially one of my first business failed, I think. So in here, we come back to you meet dad and your parents get divorced. So tell the story of how you met dad, because it's hilarious, first of all, but y'all's partnership is a major part of your life story.
Yes. So I want to bookmark a couple of things so I can come back to them. One is you need to sell in order to manage. Okay. So that's one thing around a business. And the other is how hard sales is. So let's just bookmark those two things. Okay. So meeting your dad. Like, you want the actual story?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd been dating a guy for quite some time. We had broken up. I'm living in a duplex in Smyrna. I have a lady that lives next door, a woman my age living next door to me. She lives by herself. She comes over one day. She says, hey, come on out, come out with me and my girlfriends. We're going to go out tonight. And I said, okay. And I didn't really feel very well. I didn't feel good. And we go out to this little bar restaurant place in Acres Mill that had never been to and have never been to since in my life.
In Georgia, in
Atlanta. Your dad is sitting at the bar and he's cute. And you can
so dad at this time, just to insert real quick. So dad at this time, he's come out of the Coast Guard. I think he's working at Lockheed Martin.
Yes.
Which is a big, defense contractor. They were building all kinds of stuff at the time, but he's like a helicopter and plane mechanic type person. And he's also a bodybuilder. Like, yes, that kind of bodybuilder. Everyone who just heard that, yes, that's what I mean. Puts a thong on, goes and flexes his muscles. I mean, basically goes and flexes his muscles to try and win competitions about whose muscles work the best. And he looks like it. Okay, so this hunk from Lockheed Martin, who's a bodybuilder, is sitting at the bar.
He's sitting at the bar, and we see him. And so we called the bartender over, and we said, we want to buy that guy over there a beer. Yes. Okay. You want to write a note or anything to him? He said, no, it wasn't crowded. No, just telling we bought him a beer. And of course, I'm doing the talking because, of course. And so the guy takes him over, whatever he's drinking. Who's going to remember that? And so then he wanders over and he chats with us, and everybody wants to go out and do other things. And I did go out someplace else, and I just didn't feel good. So I went home early, and then all those girls got him drunk the rest of the night. Fast forward to the next night, she asked me to go back out. We're sitting in the front of this bar. There's this big picture window at the front of the bar. And who should I see walking by the picture window but your dad? I said, y'all aren't going to believe who's coming in here, because how stupid am I? Of course he's coming in there because they asked him to. But anyway, the rest is history.
So did you ask him out, or did he ask you out at that point?
I don't know.
My assumption is that you asked him out.
Probably.
And so we'll just leave it at that, because it feels the most true to the rest of the story. We'll log that one for history that way.
That might be true.
All right. So, okay. So you meet Dad. You guys together move to Florida.
Yes.
And he had been stationed down there in St. Petersburg previously with the Coast Guard.
Mm-hmm.
And you transferred with Xerox, but you pretty quickly got recruited to join another company.
Yep.
Who many people won't recognize, but they may know some of the products that they've made or may have used some of their products. So what was this company? How'd you get recruited? Why'd you end up making that shift?
So it was Hayworth, which is an office furniture manufacturer, one of the largest privately held office furniture manufacturers in the world still today. And now they're a multinational, very large company, held in very high esteem for, people who know the industry. And I had actually started talking to a headhunter before I went to Florida. And I was already interviewing with them before I went down there. So it's just the offer came after we had already moved and I had already transferred with Xerox. So I did. I made the transition. It was not the same kind of thing because Hayworth had manufacturer's rep. That's what I was. Sold our stuff through dealers. And Hayworth is a company that was primarily known at the time for workstations, cubicles, most people call them. And so I supported the salespeople in the dealership who went to the companies and government entities that bought the product. So that was a different level of sales for me. I had not been in management with Xerox. I was going through their management program. I don't remember what they called that. So it was a level of management. You have responsibility without authority, I called it, right? I couldn't tell those people at the dealership, well, you have to do this and this, but have responsibility for them doing that and making sure they met numbers. So I did that, and didn't take me very long to become a manager there and managing people and managing geography and that sort of thing. And it was a great company and a wonderful opportunity. Good people run that company, as you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So you ended up managing a team of people who were working with dealers. Is that basically how the structure was?
That's correct.
And over time, you ended up overseeing how big of a territory, so maybe brag on yourself for a minute about how important your kind of territory and role was within the company over time.
So I managed I can't even remember what we called them at the time. I'm going to call them areas. My original position was to manage Florida and the offshore market, which Florida was a very big market for us. And then our showroom moved to South Florida. So we had to move to South Florida. You were very young and we didn't want to be down there. That's not where we wanted to raise you all. So I, reached out to the VP in Atlanta and said, so I want you to know we're moving back to Atlanta. I'd like to move back to Atlanta with Hayworth, but I'm moving back to Atlanta. And so thankfully they were able to accommodate me and I moved up there. And then I managed a number of states, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, parts of Arkansas, Panhandle of Florida. It was a pretty large area. And all of my people, not all, but a number of my people were remote. So they were working from home before working from home was a thing, because they called on dealers. And if they were,
Right.
they were in Birmingham, they live in Birmingham, and they're just, that's what they did. And
you needed them there because they needed to sell to people and
correct.
businesses in
That's
Birmingham,
exactly right. Yes. And it was great. I remember my VP. So we're both in the Atlanta office. So moving up there meant I wasn't the big person in charge anymore, right? Because now my boss is in the same office as me. And he used to give one of the ladies who works for me that, oh my God, you never find a harder worker, Patty, the hardest time. Well, he wouldn't give her a hard time directly, but he, by the way he would act and body language, she knew he was annoyed with her because she didn't make it in by 8 every morning because she had kids, she was getting to school, all these kinds of things. But I knew that woman worked harder than anybody we had. He said, would you please talk to him? So I go sit in his office and I said, look, you got to quit doing this. She knows that like when you look at your watch when she's coming in, she knows you're annoyed that she's late, but she works through lunch. She's here till 6:30 at night. She'll do anything anybody needs. Why do you do this to her? Well, because our hours are 8 to 5. I said, but Milton in Birmingham, you have no idea what time he gets to his desk. You don't know if he takes 3-hour lunches. You don't know what time he quits at night. Why are you holding her to a different standard than everybody else? I'll never forget this. He says to me, he goes, we're going to agree to disagree on this, but I'm going to let you manage her and I won't look at my watch anymore.
Wow. That's like the Bezos disagree and commit thing long before Bezos was even talking about it.
I'm not familiar with that, but yes, I guess
it's just a concept he talks about. It's like in leadership, sometimes you are not going to reach an agreement, but you got to move forward and you can't be fighting over it on an ongoing basis. And so he said the principle he uses is disagree and commit. And, all these things are always rooted in old wisdom from mentors and stuff like that. So it's funny, maybe it's a similar kind of, it was clearly a popular concept before it became popular. And this was an example of it. I'm going to let you do that, but I want you to know I disagree, but I'm not going to torture her anymore. And she was one of your best performers.
Oh my gosh, forever. And even after she left Hayworth and she went back into direct sales at a dealership that wasn't a Hayworth dealer, that woman, any corporation would take 100 of her.
Yeah. I mean, she crushed it in terms of quotas and yeah. Okay. So you guys move up to Atlanta. I'm like 6 at the time, but before this, obviously I was created. This was an accident. You all actually weren't deciding or you all weren't planning to have children. And we talked a little bit about this, but we talk a lot about parenting on the show. And I realize the show is really it's actually about entrepreneurship, really. And the reason we talk about stuff like parenting and finances and just some of the things we talk about is that when you're an entrepreneur, all this stuff is related. You can't have one without all the other parts. So I guess what was it like when you realized, oh my God, we're going to have a kid and we didn't mean to?
Well, it was an eye-opener. We had just put a contract on that little bitty house, 3-bedroom, 1 bath, no central heat, no central air, built in 1926. We'd put a contract on the house and we found out we were pregnant with you. It's like, well, I guess we're having a kid. And so we did. And your dad was going back to school and I was settling into this, oh gosh, so, you have to tell him, hey, by the way, I'm pregnant. And it was different back then. Thankfully, I had a manager, the same one that was in Atlanta, that I followed to Atlanta, that understood things and was fine with it. But it was very hard because I was the sole breadwinner. Your dad was in school. So, we hired a lady to keep you part-time while your dad was going to school. He kept you part-time. And he worked part-time. It was crazy. It was a crazy time.
Yeah. I mean, I think about, I'm basically in that stage of life right now. And I think about, we're more well-resourced than y'all were at the time. I mean, y'all were still very much like, we definitely weren't poor by any means, but you were trying to make it. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Trying to make ends meet. So maybe a couple questions about that stage of life, and then we'll come back and we'll really talk about like our stories intertwining at that point, obviously. What made it important to you for Dad to go back to school? He went down to University of South Florida.
Yeah.
And this was something that I get the sense that in y'all's relationship, Dad has a hard time sometimes saying what he wants. And you try to fill in the gaps and really encourage him to do some of those things occasionally. this seems like one of them. So how did that work, and why did you encourage him to go back?
So part of that was selfish because I wanted him to go back. I wanted him to be a college graduate. Now, now, of course, you look back on it and say, oh, good Lord, it didn't matter. But it did matter, and it's important to him. And he'll be forever thankful that he did that. But he would talk about how he had, he'd gone to junior college and had some credits. He even got accepted to the University of Florida, but he could have gone, like he had the GI Bill and he could have but he couldn't afford to get there, literally. And this was before me. He had no money. So fast forward and we decide we're going to marry. And I told him, I said, it's important to me personally that you get your degree. And I think it's important to you. And it was important to him. So, we moved down. He actually first got accepted to George Mason University in Washington, D.C., because I almost went to Leesburg, Virginia, which is Xerox's International Training Center. Ended up moving to Florida. And so that's why he went to USF. And it was a challenging time, but he got his degree and I was very proud of him. It's not easy to do as an adult, nor is it easy to be the spouse. He's going to college with all these young little girls. And not that I was old, but, it was a challenging time.
Yeah, I think y'all, from my impression, y'all had a lot of that kind of thing during those early years of my life, especially. But him going to college, you're the sole breadwinner. Presumably, it's tough to balance, me and then me and my brother when he came into the picture. Which at that point, it's like, well, we got one, might as well have another, I guess.
Well, that's literally when you're about 2 years old, I said to your dad, I said, we cannot let this child grow up alone. We really need to give him a sibling.
Oh, Lord. And Dad's like, well, all right.
Well, you know your dad. Okay.
I do. Okay. So I come into the picture when I'm about 6, we moved back to Atlanta, and you're with Hayworth at the time. And there's a lot that happens in terms of you kind of being recruited into the upper echelons of management and people wanting you to grow. You end up back at Xerox for a period of time. And this is all on the way to you eventually becoming an entrepreneur and kind of following your dad's footsteps. And so I want to talk about all that and a lot of the lessons that you've learned about building teams, sales, entrepreneurship, and all of that in the second half. But like we do, we're going to take a break real quick.
Okay.
And we're back. Mama Bear Brooks. Okay, so we left off and you moved to Atlanta. You are with Hayworth, this office furniture manufacturer. You're managing a very sizable territory of the Southeast. As I understand it, looking back, you were very well respected in this company at the time. So much so, actually, that they assigned a very special person to come to work for you. And I wonder if you might just tell a story about who this person was and why they chose you for him to learn under.
Matthew Hayworth, and he was the grandson of the founder of the company. His father at the time was the CEO. I don't know that they chose me so much as they might have chosen Bob, who was our VP, but they were grooming Matthew. It's a privately family-held company. Grooming Matthew. They wanted him to learn all parts of the business, and sales was really the last part he was going to learn. He was a young man. He was in his 20s and very green. And Bob calls me in his office one day and says, I want you to sit down, and I'm in a hurry. So I'm like, do I need to sit? He goes, you're probably going to want to sit. So I do. And he says, so Matthew Hayworth's coming to work for you. I said, you're kidding, right? He says, no, I'm not kidding. They want him to learn sales, and they want him down here. They want him learning under you, which again is probably not exactly how that was, but that's how it worked out. And I said, okay. Of course, all the details, rolled out after that. But I said, Bob, I'm just going to say one thing. Because my group, we would have quarterly meetings where we would all come into Atlanta. We worked hard and we played hard. We never crossed any lines. We were always professional, but we had fun together. But we were professional. We worked very, very hard. We were really good. I was the number one area manager in the country one year, but we had a good time. And I told him, I said, I'm not going to change the culture because Matthew's here. We're going to keep doing what we're doing. He goes, okay. That's fine. And then, the details roll out. Matthew comes down and he comes to work with us all and kind of integrates himself. And to his credit, he got it. He understood I am integrating into a work group. And unless they really draw outside the lines, I'm not saying anything. And he didn't. And he had fun and he learned a ton. Of course, respected everybody. I had some tremendous people working for me, really strong professionals, several women, a couple of men who we just were a really good work group. And he fit in right into that and just rolled with the punches. He was not very good at sales. And he would readily admit that and tell you that he wasn't. But many years later, when he became chairman of the board of the company, I heard through the grapevine that he had become chairman of the board because we just at that point were exchanging Christmas cards. So I called him, because I wanted him to know I was proud of him. I was happy for him. Didn't reach him, left him a voicemail. He calls me later and he said, now, mind you, how old would Matthew be by then? In his 40s, probably mid 40s. So he's got teenage kids and stuff. He goes, I wanted to call. He sounded like the 26-year-old that came to work for me. He goes, I wanted to call you so bad. He goes, but I didn't want to sound like I was bragging. I said, oh, good grief, Matthew. I said, of course I would want to know that. I'm so proud of you. And one of the things I'm proudest of was during that phone call, him telling me that other than his father, I was the person in his professional life that had the most profound impact on him.
Mm.
And some of that was probably because of what he came to me to learn and the whole work group around him and how foreign that was. You go to learn how to install that furniture and okay, I can do my hands and so I'm sure that was part of it. But, it's quite an honor to have somebody like that who's now reached the pinnacle of his company tell you that.
Right. Yeah. My understanding is that he's not the only person who said that kind of thing to you over the years, though. So it's not just that situation.
No, it's not. But yeah.
So what do you think, if you're really reflecting on it and maybe releasing humility for a moment, which is a thing I love about you, learn from you. Like, what do you think it is that makes working for you so special to people?
I don't know. I think I'm a very genuine person, very caring. Nobody ever wonders what I'm thinking. And as I've aged, I've learned to smooth the edges a little bit. So I don't necessarily deliver things as strongly as I used to deliver them. And in fact, back in the day at Xerox, when I did go back in management there, when I went back, people who didn't work for me, especially men, would ask men who worked for me, how in the world can you work for that woman? I could never work for her. And of course, the men who worked for me would die for me. So it was just, sometimes it was a matter of perspective, but I would go to the wall for people. If they deserved for me to go to the wall for them, I would. And I was never afraid to manage up. So I was respected, down the chain, and I was respected up the chain. And probably because I'm a genuine person and and I care.
When we moved to Atlanta, so we lived in this little house in Dunwoody, Georgia, northeast of the city, and lived in this house, cul-de-sac, right on a little creek. And that's the first memory that I have of you and your teams. You had a cookout or some barbecue in the backyard, and kids were running around. I was running around. We're not gonna shame Matthew Hayworth for one of the funny things he did at that. It wasn't anything bad. He just was playing on the swings and being too much of a kid. But I remember now looking back how cohesive your team was and how, you mentioned having fun. That was an example of that. It seemed was y'all all being in the same place, having some beers, having some food, enjoying each other's company. I wonder where that came from for you. What did you have a philosophy on what brings a team together, or what made that the way that you thought was the best to build the team?
I don't know, Barrett. I honestly don't know. I had people that lived all over the place. So if I was going to bring them in for a meeting, you wanted to have some social time. You didn't want them just there to work. I enjoy social time. I enjoy getting to know people on a level other than just what is their, the face of who they are at work. Because people will perform for you. If people want you to succeed personally and you want them to succeed personally, people are going to perform for you. And it's just how I was. I'm a social person. And the lady we were talking about earlier, Patty, who I had to tell Bob, please quit looking at your watch when she comes in. She and I were very good friends, and we were friends before she worked for me. And another woman who worked for me actually came last Friday to spend the night here, her and her husband. But Patty in particular, if she and I were in a work situation and she's introducing me to somebody, this is my boss, this is my manager. But if we're in a personal situation, she said, oh, let me introduce you to my friend Ann. Everybody knew that there's, we have different levels of us, right? And there's different parts of us, and work is one part. And you mentioned that earlier. And we got to respect all of those parts if we're going to succeed and if we want the people who work for us to succeed. So I don't know. Yeah. I guess that was part of it.
This is a book that I really love written by a woman named Kim Scott. And it's called Radical Candor. It's just a great framework for saying things directly, but also caring personally about people, are these two dimensions that she talks about. And radical candor, in this 2x2 grid being the ideal place. You care about them and you say the things that need to be said very directly. And I think you were practicing that way before that was a framework in a book. And I think part of it, through my observation, is that because you had such a valuable and deep relationship with all your people, you could say things to them that maybe coming from someone else, they would have felt like, well, you're kind of being an asshole right now.
That doesn't mean they didn't think it.
Yeah, but also they knew it was from a place of you cared about them, you wanted them to do good work, and you had high expectations for them. And so I look at how I've built teams over the years, and I know that it was so influenced by just osmosis of watching you with your people, having them over for holiday parties, hearing y'all laugh downstairs, watching y'all have a barbecue, whatever it was, that ingrained something in me that was like, okay, so you have to build a relationship with your people, and then they will do great work. And up to then, you're just their boss. And mostly people hate their bosses.
You do.
But that changes a lot when you focus on the relationship. And I just think you did that, by nature, I guess. Or maybe it was like watching your dad have people over all the time. Who knows where it came from? But something in you knew that's what people needed.
Yeah. And, going back to the Xerox years, of course, Carol, your aunt, my sister, older sister, worked at Xerox. And there was a period of time when I was as a manager, which is the next step, which we'll get to, I'm sure, but where she was a product specialist, selling sales, but she was a product specialist. I was a manager of a sales team, and she supported my sales team. So, we'd get together and talk about a major entity that we needed to be doing something, project. And we're having this meeting, and I'm saying, okay, I think maybe you should do this and you should do this. And of course, I'm telling Carol what she should be doing. And Carol would go off and do it because, number one, that's how Carol is. And people would marvel at that. How can y'all even do that? Well, because we're in the work environment and we're both professionals. And I know my role and she knows her role, and that's how we're going to do things. And she was my favorite person to work with from a support perspective because she was anything she needed to do, she did.
Your whole family, the girls, especially your sisters, y'all just seem to have this inherent standard of excellence with your work that you expect of yourselves, of each other. I wonder, where do you think that comes from? Like, how did you all end up with that? I think that's pretty rare.
It is. It is rare. I said earlier that I got the gregarious, want to socialize stuff from dad. I got my managerial skills from mom. And I can remember going to the OR for whatever reason, having to go by there, pick something up from mom, whatever the example may be, and watching mom interact. And simple things where she would go out into the hall where someone was waiting to go back into surgery and just put her hand on their hand and comfort them and tell them everything was going to be fine. And that wasn't her role. I mean, shoot, there were people 3 levels below her that was their role, but she was there and that person was lying there, and that's what she would do. And I can remember watching her talk to surgeons that are like a head taller than her because how tiny she is, and giving them what for, because that was her OR and they were not doing things the way they were supposed to be doing things. So I think a lot of that part of it that we might have all learned from her. I don't know what it was.
Oh, that's fascinating. I don't think I didn't never put that together, But it makes sense. I mean, in an OR, you got to be meticulous because mistakes mean people die, basically. And, I never really got to see that professional side of, we call her Mima, but it's fascinating to think about just that level of, excellence required to do that job well is probably extraordinarily high. And if y'all were watching that, it just makes sense.
And it was very impactful to see. Well, first of all, think about it. Mom was a Mexican American woman, this tiny little person, and she's running this operating room in one of the large hospitals in Atlanta. I mean, that's impressive just by itself that she made it to that. And so I think a lot of that piece of it came from her, but the have fun while you work part came from Dad.
Yeah. He definitely knows how to have fun. So, I mean, you were a woman at work in what were largely male-dominated fields, either who you were selling into or who you were surrounded by up the org charts. What was that like for you? What was it like? Kind of like, number one, you were a primary breadwinner in our household. That was very rare. I actually am not sure I know anyone else that was true for. Some dual earning households. And Dad worked, but you were the breadwinner.
Right.
You were managing area sales teams, and it was largely a male-dominated corporate world at the time. Like, what was that like carving your path through that?
I guess very much like I didn't put myself into that. I'm a Mexican American. Neither did I put myself into I'm a woman in a man's world. Again, consciously or subconsciously, I wasn't boxing myself in that way. I am a business person in the business world, and that's how I'm going to manage things. Now, that's not to say there wasn't plenty of sexual harassment challenges in that regard, sometimes from men of authority, because there was so much more of that then.
Yeah.
I hope than there is today. It's very much harder.
Well, you just have to watch TV shows from the time, and it's like rampant, It's just much more generally accepted.
Yeah. But I mean, I had this conversation with Nicole one time that I just feel like it made me stronger. I mean, I wasn't afraid to stand up for myself. I never thought, oh my God, I can't say this to this person. I might get fired, because I never worried about getting fired. Not that couldn't have happened, but I just had enough confidence in myself. Well, if that guy's going to fire me because I'm going to tell him to leave me alone, I'll just go someplace else.
And you just knew you'd be fine.
I knew I would be fine. Yeah. So I never really thought about it. There were certainly times when I was in uncomfortable situations, but also being a woman was also helpful to me at times. Heck, I was going to take advantage of that. Why not?
Yeah.
Fast forward into my career now, and when I was president of NAFA Atlanta, which is, of course, the insurance and financial services, our main trade organization, one of the gentlemen on the board wanted me to take on a lot of very female-oriented things. He wanted me to become the face of women with NAFA. And I don't know why. I just wasn't comfortable with that. When I sought mentorships, I wanted the best there was. It didn't matter to me whether it was a male or a female. I wanted people to teach me who were the best at what they did. If they happened to be female, great. If they happened to be male, great. I don't know why I was always like that, but I can't even remember what chromosomes men have more of than women, but I definitely have more of those than I'm supposed to. Probably it's part of my sports thing.
Yeah. It's maybe it's just like seeing your mom at work too, growing up. I mean, I think a lot about that for me. I feel like an alien sometimes. I've told you this before in my work environments that I've been in, because I'm often much more sensitive and nurturing and kind and like traditional female qualities or stereotypical female qualities in the way that I manage and lead. And I've got plenty of not that too, to be sure, as I'm sure people who have worked for me would say. But I often find myself at odds with kind of like the default stereotypical male way of leading. And it's this interesting middle ground, but I think that's because I learned most of what I know about leading at work, at least from you, and I learned a lot of servant leadership and doing things for others from Dad, because that was his way of being quiet and just doing things on the ground in service of others. And so I picked up all of that from both of you. But, I don't know that means I've got more, female chromosomes in me. I think it's just, I was conditioned to think about a lot more things, and also to default to like, women are capable leaders because I was raised by one, and that wasn't particularly remarkable to me at the time. It was just reality.
Well, and as you said about your aunts, you were surrounded by them.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
And you married one.
So that's true. Yeah. Wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah.
So I just find that fascinating. I think this is the right point in the story. So you're at Hayworth. This is a lot of where you're learning team culture. You're setting the standard high. You're kind of, I'm sure at times, like in other people's eyes, brashly kind of blazing a path for yourself. And I'm sure some of the men didn't like it. And I think you got recruited to go the corporate route at this point. Is that right?
Yeah. You're talking about up the corporate ladder.
Yeah, up the corporate ladder.
Yes.
You had a path up the corporate ladder.
Yes.
Because you had a great reputation within the company.
Yes.
And this is a really important point where you had to make some decisions about life and lifestyle. And you were on the road a lot back then. I remember as a kid, dad was at home taking care of us, making all our meals, and you had to travel a lot. Yeah. I'm sure it was hard for all of us in each our own way.
Yeah.
And so you get recruited internally to move up, and you all had a conversation about it. So what was that like to really think about, okay, so obviously more money, more power, more all the things, but there's going to be some costs that come with it, or an unknown path in a different direction.
It takes a long time to know yourself, as you well know. And by that time, I had really gotten to know who I was and what was important to me. And I realized that if I kept moving up the chain of command, and I probably could have gone to the top, pretty close to the top of Hayworth. Matthew Hayworth was there and home office, they thought very highly of me. But I realized that the further up I go, the more of what I don't want is my job. I'm on the road more. I'm away more. I'm doing things I don't want to do more. I'm further away from the customer. That's when I went back to Xerox, back in sales, which was a crazy time.
Yeah, probably a big change. All right. So you decided, I'm not going to follow this path. There's too many costs associated with it. And I don't want more travel, more commitments, more work that I don't want to do. And you decided to go back to Xerox. So you were a boomerang. What fueled that decision? Why didn't you just stay at Hayworth? Why did you decide to go back to Xerox at that point?
I suppose I could have stayed at Hayworth and gone backwards. Carol was still at Xerox. She said, hey, we're hiring account managers. So I had to look in the mirror and say, can you do it again? I mean, can you be where the rubber meets the road and be successful again? All the things you tell other people to do. And I decided, yes, I can do that. So I went back, and it was hard. And I was given a territory that had been vacant for large government entities and corporations, but not worked for a long time. So it was hard. And it took me a full year to turn that territory around. But meanwhile, they're trying to get me to go into management. I kept saying, you don't want me in management. You don't want me, or I don't want in management. You need leaders in the bullpen. I can be a leader in the bullpen. But I finally let them talk me into it. And the single largest sale that probably anybody in Atlanta at Xerox just ever had, I sold, but it all closed and installed the month I became a manager. So the gentleman who took my territory, it was like 151 pieces of equipment going into the DeKalb County Public Service. He got to go to France because of, that was a big deal. And he was always so appreciative. He was such a sweet man. He worked for me, and then he had that territory. Or no, he didn't. We worked together, and then he had that territory. And then he worked for me. So he took over the territory. But anyway, I then went into management pretty quickly after I went back to Xerox, which I knew I didn't want to do. It a lot of responsibilities took me away from you all, which of course led me on my next path. But that's what I did. I said, okay, I can be home. If I go back to Xerox and I sell, I can be home. And that's why I did that.
So you end up back on the path you were kind of on, just different corporation, one you were familiar with back at Xerox. And, it's almost like you can't help yourself. You're good at what you do, and people want to give you more responsibility when you're good at what you do, because a lot of times it's hard to find good people. And at some point, you all started having a conversation about a different lifestyle, different way you wanted to live, different commitments you wanted to make, and you saw this opportunity to buy your dad's insurance agency that we talked about earlier. He had been in forever, had done really well at, made a bunch of money. What was that conversation like between you and dad about, I mean, effectively, you're kind of like a franchisee, but you are an entrepreneur.
Right.
Like,
yeah,
it is entrepreneurship for sure.
Yeah.
So what was that like to make that decision?
So you all were getting into, you're getting baseball's becoming a big thing for you, and Brendan's into the karate, and I wanted flexibility. I wanted to take y'all to Chick-fil-A before baseball games, and I couldn't do that having a corporate job. And Dad was ready to get out of the business. And so I said to your dad, why don't we buy it? Let's see if the numbers work, and let's buy it. And he was fine with that. Okay, let's give it. I mean, he had background in it, right? Remember, he worked in it. We did it. It was scary. There's a stream of income, right? Because it's an insurance agency and you've got those premiums and it's there. But of course, I had a note I had to pay, and employees you have to pay, and all those sorts of things. So it was definitely a transition. The people management part was the easiest part of it, but it was the best thing I ever did. So you're running a small business. I had all women working for me. That's kind of how, not today, but especially then, that's how insurance agencies were. It's all women. The agent's a man and the workers are women. And I had all women working for me, but it allowed me to also have such an understanding of where these young ladies were in life, where they were going to go in life, and have understanding and empathy when they, if one of them wanted to go see their kid do something, go do it. I'm not going to dock their pay or any of that kind of stuff. When, the woman that I was closest to, whose sister got paralyzed, she was out for quite some time. My employee, the sister, because where she needed to be was by her sister's bed, not sitting in my office. It was certainly a tremendous sacrifice, isn't the right word, but a strain on the business. But I wouldn't have made any other decision but to and pay her, because that's what we needed to do. But it was easy. Your dad and I were of like minds when we did that.
First day after you buy this thing and you're going from corporate, basically corporate whole career to now you're fully in charge. There's no real corporate ladder. There's like home office that you're responsible to kind of, but really it's sink or swim on your own. You walk in the agency that day. What's that day like for you?
It's funny because your Opa and I kind of passed each other coming in and out the door. People think, oh, well, he stayed there and mentored you. No, he didn't. I mean, he was ready to be done. His basic tenets for how he ran things. And my attitude was, if it isn't broken, I'm not going to fix it. And so I didn't do well in terms of how I made the transition, because I tried to bring the corporate world to that small business. And there are certainly things you can bring, but I did not do it the right way. And everybody but one person left.
I think I knew this.
Yeah.
So what?
I mean,
so
not immediately,
now,
but pretty quickly.
So looking back now, what did you try and bring that didn't work? And then how did you change from there after all the people left?
Well, a lot more structure than they were used to, because, Dad was not about structure. A business plan, sales goals. I mean, these girls were just used to answering the phone and taking care of and if somebody called in and said they wanted to buy an auto policy, well, okay, we'll sell you one. I mean, that's not how I operate. So the turnover was going to have to happen.
Yeah.
And of course, I was able to bring people in that I could train, and they could, in many ways, work in my image. And they had an understanding of what the expectations were when they came. So, I mean, it wasn't an easy transition. Your dad did work with me for a period of time, but then we began to realize, okay, one of us needs to be home because you two were not doing well with both of us being away.
Interesting.
It wasn't going to be me. And so it defaulted to your dad.
It's an interesting thing because you bought the agency from your dad. Your dad went through some hard financial times, kind of took a big hit in the big real estate crash of 2008, and the stock market fell apart. And meanwhile, I mean, you were building that agency kind of into a juggernaut relative to what you had acquired. How did you do that? How did you change the trajectory of the business? And then we'll talk about kind of the interesting dynamic that created, I think, in the family too.
So Dad always grew that business until the last few years, until he was kind of retired on the job.
Yeah.
So I do want to say that he was very successful over all of those years. But of course, when I came in, I think really it was just hard work and expectations. And I did put processes in place. And that is the thing that now any agency you go in, if they're any good, they're going to have processes. But I put definite processes in place. And I would do, customer reviews. Every single person who had a policy with us got touched every single year to be offered a policy review. And it's amazing what you can sell a household if you're talking to them regularly. And back to not sell, but, well, why don't you have an umbrella policy?
Mm-hmm.
Let me tell you why you should, why this should be important to you. And so I think a lot of it was that. I was successful on the financial services side of things. That definitely secures a household. When somebody has any kind of financial services or life insurance product in the household, they're far less likely to leave you with any other line of business. So I think a lot of that, but mostly processes and managing the processes.
And then, you still brought your philosophy on team building and relationships and everything. So that all came with you, and that worked, I think.
It did. We would all sit back in the back off the kitchen and eat together. And I'd say, girls, you have a lunch hour, you can go eat. And I say, oh no, we're fine. If the phone rings or somebody comes in, I know, but it's your lunch hour. But that's just how they were. They were perfectly fine with that. And maybe it's because, number one, they didn't have sick days. If they were sick, they stayed home. I didn't count that stuff. Nor did they ever take advantage of it, ever. And that's just kind of the ethos, I guess.
Yeah.
Now, if you took advantage of it, or if you were late every day or any of that kind of stuff, I'd give you the opportunity to correct yourself. But if you didn't, you were gone.
Yeah. I think this is, I talk about this a lot. I hate firing people. It's like my least favorite thing in the world. I've been cussed out. I've been, all the things. But I definitely learned this from you. And just generally, I've adopted the philosophy that you got to hold the standard high. You got to support the people and meeting it. Do everything you can to build the relationship, give them the feedback, give them a chance to succeed. And if they can't do it, you got to get rid of them. Not because you don't love them, you don't care about them, but just like sometimes people aren't a fit for the thing they're trying to do at work. And
I literally had that conversation this morning.
It's just part of life. And that doesn't mean you don't want the best for them. They can't succeed at something else. It just means I see it before you do, and you got to go. You got to go find something else that you can be great at. Or you got to find out within yourself if you even care.
Sometimes you can help them see it. And that's kind of the conversation this morning. It's like, are you doing what you want to be doing for a living?
Mm-hmm.
Have you had that conversation with yourself?
Right.
I've coached a lot of people out of business, out of whatever the business was at the time I was in.
There's a lot there that we could continue to dive in on, but I do want to capture kind of like this latest chapter of your career. It's been a long one now. You ended up leaving the agency. Sold it.
Yeah.
And that was for our family, certainly that was a significant financial event. So I want to talk briefly about that. And then I want to talk about what I believe has been kind of like your calling level work as I've observed you do it. What did that sale of the business represent to you at the time? Like what changed after having sold it and having that financial event for you about how you thought about your career, how you thought about your financial well-being?
Well, in many ways it was scary because when I bought the agency, although I was leaving a paycheck every 2 weeks or whatever behind corporate, there was no safety net under us when I transitioned to Allstate Financial Services as a financial representative because we had no income. We had no income until I ramped up and created income. So it was a scary time, and we really weren't ready. Brendan wasn't out of school yet. We just weren't ready, but the opportunity came along. Somebody wanted to buy the agency. We sold it for, I came to your dad. These guys want to buy the agency. And he said, well, if they meet this, and this criteria, I'm comfortable. They met them all. And so we did it. But obviously selling, you get that lump sum. We were able to build a mountain house, which, hopefully will be in the family for a very long time. It gave you a level of financial security that, we had and we were building, but it definitely made a difference. Dad was very disappointed that we sold it. He felt like he had sold it to me at a discount. But when we went into it, I said, Dad, this is a business transaction. Yeah. It needs to be a win-win. So that's how you need to approach it. If he'd had it his way, we wouldn't have sold it. But it was the right thing. It was definitely the right thing for me. And then I got even more flexibility, of course, once I ramped up and I felt like I was in a place where I could.
Yeah, it's interesting, going back to the mirroring paths That's basically what we experienced when I left ConvertKit. I've talked a lot about this on the show, had Nathan on, and we had a major financial event for our family, in technology. It was like a fine one relative to what a lot of people do. But for our family, it was very meaningful. Also, I had no plan for where money was going to come from next, and so it was like this joint thing where it was more money than we had ever had in our bank account, certainly more taxes than we had ever paid. But also, it's like I had a year, maybe year and a half that I was comfortable not earning. And then everything else, I wanted to sit there for 30 years so that we could have a baseline retirement plan. Because I had worked for 10 years without really putting a lot of money away, failing at a business, coming out of debt, like all this stuff to get there. And the week I left, we found out we were pregnant with our second kid. And it's like, well, shit, I got to move faster than I even thought. So what I'm relating to is that felt scary to me. And I'm hearing you say like it was a similar kind of situation.
Yes.
Except for your kids, we were older.
Yeah.
They're expensive. And,
But it's also a motivating factor.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a fine line between motivation and desperation. It's a motivating factor, and you've got to keep it in that realm. And you got to remember to keep doing all the right things every day in life. And anytime people are asking me for advice, you got to wake up every morning and do the right thing all day.
We both love Kirby Smart, our head football coach at the University of Georgia. Come all the way back to that. He's got this saying, chop wood, carry water, chop wood, carry water. And I love it because I suffered from this early in my career for sure. I'd do the things that led to success, and then I'd like freak out and I'd stop doing them. And then I'd stop being successful. And it's like, well, yeah, you dumb. If you were the example, the concrete example was I started writing when I started my first business, and I began growing an audience. I got a couple of articles picked up, got a couple thousand people on my email list, and I felt that desperation financially. And so it was like, oh, I got to scramble and make money from this now. And then I stopped writing. And it's like, that's the very thing that created the opportunity to begin with. And that was the beginning of the end now when I look back. And so I think now what I realize is exactly what you were just saying. It's the chop wood, carry water every day. What do? I speak at a conference every quarter. I follow up. I have a dinner party. I send a voice note to every person I meet. I have a system that I work, and I always do it. Even when I'm full, when I'm empty, it doesn't matter. That's the system. And if I stop doing it, you need to tell me, first of all, hey, you're doing that thing again. But I know the results will lag.
Well, and for me and so many of my peers across the country will say, what do you do? What's your secret? And the problem is it's not sexy, right? I take care of my customers. I do client reviews. I explain to them what they're invested in and why, and help them determine where they're going and show them how they're getting there and what their cash flow is going to look like in retirement, and, wash, rinse, repeat. And my gosh, the depth of loyalty that you get from people when you do that. I just had a review with somebody yesterday. No, I didn't have the review yesterday. I had the review a couple of weeks ago. Started thinking about something he had said, thought about it over the weekend before last, emailed him that last Monday. And I said, hey, I've been thinking about this. Maybe we might want to do this. And here's all the reasons why. So anyway, yesterday I had the follow-up call where we're implementing what I had suggested to him. And I walked him through all the mechanics of it. And the last thing he said to me before we got off the phone was, thank you for thinking of my family. Not that I sold him something, but I was able to help him see why, hey, here's another piece of that puzzle. And he knows, because he knows I know the whole picture. At this point in my career, for me, that's what's so important every single day is take care of the people. It's amazing what comes to you when you're taking care of people.
Yeah, just let that one hang there for a minute. It's funny when you say no one wants to hear that, or it's not sexy. I was thinking, don't nobody want to hear that. There was two things that came to mind. One was we used to do this documentary series at ConvertKit about our customers. We made a couple coffee table books, and I was always looking for examples, unique examples in the creator economy that would allow us to tell a story about what the creator economy was, and that it wasn't just people learning how to run businesses, teaching people how to run businesses who teach people how to run, there's this weird pyramid scheme to some of it. I wanted to find people who were like teaching people how to make food, or teaching arts and crafts, or teaching teachers about how to be better in the classroom. Or I want to find 100 different examples of, look, here's all the things that aren't the thing you think it is. Mm-hmm. And the team would always be like, how do you find these people? You want to know how I found those people? I went into our database. I downloaded a list of our customers. I included their website link in the download that I made, the CSV, and I went to every single website and read the about page of our top 1,000 customers.
Wow.
And I picked 100 I thought were best. Mm-hmm. And you know what people said when I told them that's how I did it? They were like, oh. And no one else ever did it that way. Yeah. Finally, we found someone who cared that much, and and she started doing it too. And she still runs that part of the program today. But
hey, you remember how I said I wanted to bookmark something?
Mm-hmm.
I particularly wanted to bookmark you tell anybody who's going to run a business that they need to sell.
Yep.
There's a flip side to that. And it's an important one, which is just because you're good at selling does not mean that you're going to be good at running a business.
Mm.
And a lot of people think that. A lot of people think, oh, wow, I can sell, therefore I'm going to go run my own business. And they're terrible at it because they're good at doing. They're good at being in the business, not working on the business.
So, okay. So a lot of people talk about this, right? Like the working in the business, working on the business. What does working on the business entail? Like, what are the things that fall in that bucket?
Developing people, having long-range plans, understanding, okay, today, if I'm a salesperson, today I need to make X number of calls. But if I want this business to succeed, I need to understand, what does this business look like? What do I see it looking like 5 years from now? How many people are we going to have? What do we need? What gaps do I have in my own skill set that I need to, fill for? All that sort of thing. And it just, too many people make the mistake of thinking because I can sell, I can manage. And a lot of support people, I've seen this in my career, so many people who support salespeople. Maybe they're a tech consultant who supports a heavy duty salesperson. And they look at all that and they look at all the money that salesperson they make and they think, well, I'm doing all the work. I need to go do that. And they fail miserably. Why? Because they don't understand that they're eating what that person hunted.
Yeah, my friend Mo Bunnell, who was, I don't remember what episode, a while back, I need my episode list next to me, but he talks about this in terms of winning the work and doing the work. And those are distinct things. Mm-hmm. Winning the work is a separate set of tasks and skills from implementing the work, mm-hmm. doing the work. Yeah, and that's what you're talking about. I think.
It is. And people get frustrated because they think, well, implementing the work is just as hard. Maybe it's harder. In many ways, yes, it is. But you have to have the work to implement.
Right.
So I just always try to make that clear to people and I've had people who are in support roles that say, oh, well, I want to do that. And I'll say, okay, maybe you can, but let me tell you all the things you need to be honest with yourself about before you try that.
There were 100 other topics I wanted to get to, but we're nearing the end of our time. And I want to ask you maybe a couple wrap-up questions here. One of them is going to be selfish. But, we didn't get to talk about parenthood. We didn't get to talk as much about marriage as I wanted to. This chapter of life, you're in the probably latter third of life now, and like what that's like. So, if you're a hit, maybe we'll have you back.
Boy,
but
talk about pressure.
Hey, we only control the inputs. We don't control how people respond. All right. So my observation of you in this chapter of your career, which is when, you've kind of been in this chapter of advising people financially as I've entered adulthood. Mm-hmm. So my kind of whole adult life, like post being under your household, has been watching you do this work for the most part. How long have you been doing financial advising?
Since 2007.
Okay. Yeah. So basically right after I graduated high school. So my observation is that this feels like the purest expression of who you are and what you really enjoy. And you seem to really just be naturally drawn to it for whatever combination of reasons. And I wonder what combination of reasons you think those are. Like, what has made this chapter feel so much like your career home for you?
So the thing I've always liked about sales is that interaction, but one person to another. Okay. And as you move up that chain of command, you don't have that anymore. Mm-hmm. So that brought me back to that. And what I do every day is help people plan for, transition to, and enjoy a financially secure retirement. If I have an elevator pitch, that's it. Yeah. And I just realized in learning it, because I had to learn my craft when I sold the agency and I got into this, is I love it. It is so amazing to watch someone go from either I have no idea if I can retire, or I want to retire at 62. I'm thinking, well, that's not happening. Or, what do I look like and how do I make this happen? And what does it look like when I'm not making money anymore? To be able to put all of that puzzle together for somebody, to be able to show them, here's what you're going to look like, or you're going to have to work a few more years and this is why, but they absorb that, they take it, they feel good about it. And okay, now I know what I need to do. I don't know, Barrett. It really has awakened something in me that I feel like I'm making a difference to people, in people's lives, a real measurable difference in people's lives.
Seems to me like it brings all the things together that you've learned over the years.
Yes.
Of how to treat people. You're an entrepreneur still, you're responsible for every dollar you make. You're still affiliated to a wider network of people where you can mentor and teach, and you get some people development stuff, but you also don't have to manage as much. You don't have like a team that you're responsible for in the same way.
I am doing that again now, because I now have people, working with me, because I'm not getting any younger and I do need to be able to turn this over to somebody. But yes, you're right. It has put all of those together. And there have been times since I've been doing this that I've thought, gosh, I wish I started this earlier. But then the next thought is, I would not have been anywhere remotely as successful had I started this at a younger age. It's the wisdom that only time gives you that has made me good at what I do.
Yeah. And all those collected experiences. And that makes sense to me. So, I was writing down when I was making my notes for this episode, obviously it's like, you're my mom. I didn't have to try super hard like I do a lot of times, but I was writing down memories and things that like, I'd want to selfishly ask you. And there were so many things, but one of the things I reflected a lot on in my life, I was playing basketball last night, and I love sports. People hear me talk about it. So we share that. It's an affliction, but I was great at baseball, but I love basketball. And I had injured my shoulder when I started playing again last year, and it's finally healed again. So I got my shot back. So I was like playing pretty well last night. And I took the last shot of the last game of the night, and it was like this sidestep deep three, and I drilled it, and it was hilarious. And no one cares because it's pickup basketball at a church. But I was thinking about how there's been something in my life that there's a difference between a pickup game and a game with referees and a clock and a coach and all of that. And one comes from a place of joy for me, and I can just perform. And it's like, I didn't even think about the fact that, it's like, because who cares that it's the last shot in a pickup game? But then you put a clock and a referee and a coach and all of that, and something about that expectation feels totally different to me. I've had to do a lot of work around that, of like really valuing and being able to perform at the same level when there's something on the line, basically when I'm successful, the challenges of success. So as my mom, watching me grow up and all the ways you've raised me, and you've raised me to have high standards and to perform and all this stuff, what do you think about me makes it feel different when I feel like there's an expectation of performance versus it's just coming from a place of like joy and fun and all of that?
I think you need to find a way for those two things to meet, because that's what I feel like I found in my work. Not that there's not expectations and pressure and all that kind of stuff. There is, because I still have financial responsibilities, of course. But I have found a way for those things to meet for me. And I kind of feel like you're getting there.
Yeah, I think that at work for sure. It's just very interesting. Sometimes I think back and it's like, I probably could have played legitimate baseball, but I think I was scared of it back then.
Yeah.
I'm not in the same way now, but it's just fascinating to think about that, because I want to develop that in my boys. I want to develop their ability to become great at whatever they choose. I literally don't care what it is, but I do want them to have the experience being great. I think I have experience being truly great in athletics in little moments. And I think I'm getting there in my career. And so it's just interesting to think about sustaining success and what it looks like when the pressure's on and people, I just spoke at a conference last week, and what everyone who was there last year expected of me was like, this guy's going to change my life. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't know. I don't know if I will, but all I can be is me. So I'm going to do what I can.
Yeah. But I mean, I do feel like you are doing what you're supposed to do, because I feel like a lot of my work is teaching and leading and educating, because that's just part of my soul. And I feel like it's also part of yours, and maybe it's in your genes, but that's what you're doing every day.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's right. Okay, my 2 closing questions, same as always.
Yeah.
What is the most beautiful version of the future that you can imagine?
Well, the real most beautiful version would be your father being whole. But that not happening, because it's not going to happen.
So just some quick context there for listeners. I think I've mentioned this before. My dad, a couple years ago, got diagnosed with Parkinson's, and we're fighting through that journey as a family. And it's obviously painful. There was an aspect of it that was relieving because we didn't know what was going on with him. Yep. And then there's an aspect of it that's really scary, really hard, because it's going to be a hard road. And so we're in that together right now.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But I found
hear you on that.
Peace in many ways with that. And so now it's, what I would say is that we get to live a long life together. Whatever that does to him, that we get to grow old together still and enjoy things for as long as we can.
Yeah. That's sweet. That's such an important reminder. It's been interesting how many answers revolve around family. That like whatever we do in the world, really it comes down to.
It does. Well, especially at this point. I mean, I'm 65 years old, right? Sorry, I didn't mean to cry. But, we didn't talk about marriage, but, your dad and I have been together 40 years, married 39 this May. Yeah. And boy, I'll tell you what, there is a lot to be said for a long marriage when you go through this kind of thing.
Yeah. So next time you come on, we'll talk a lot about marriage, a lot about parenting, how you raised us and all of that. So my last question is, who are you becoming through the work that you're doing, through the journey that you're on at this point in your life?
Who am I becoming? I'm becoming, and I have become someone who wants to help other people experience their lives fully. And when you go through so many stages, because now I've been doing this a long time with other people, and you go through their own heartaches, their losing of people, you carry so many stories. And I think that's who I'm becoming, somebody who's very, very comfortable with themselves and where I am and what I get to do for and with other people.
One of the things that strikes me about your work is that you've been such an observer to so many key moments in people's lives, such an observer and witness to so much grief.
Cried with people.
Yeah, I know you carry a lot of that with you, but also to wonderful events, families growing and triumphs and successes, financial events, all of that. It's just interesting reflecting on that as you share that answer, how much of a witness you've been for so many of the people you work with and how much they value that. It's a really beautiful gift you give people.
Yep.
So, all right, Mom. Thanks for joining me.
You're welcome.
Love you.
Love you too.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Good Work. I'm your host, Barrett Brooks, and this podcast is produced by my friends over at Podcast Royale. My guest today was my mom, Ann Brooks. It's actually kind of hard to follow along with her work anywhere online, but if you're based in Central Florida or the greater Atlanta area and you want support planning for your financial future, I'll add a link in the show notes so you can find her page. And as always, you can find all of the show notes at goodworkshow.com. It includes all the links and every other resource we talked about in this episode and every other episode. If this is your first time tuning in, you can subscribe to future episodes in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you enjoyed today's episode, I hope you'll grab the link to the episode, drop it in a text message, and send it to just one friend you think would enjoy it. Someone you think would benefit maybe from hearing this conversation with my mom. And let me know what you thought as well. I'd love to know if you'd like my mom to join me again sometime for a second episode, if you want to hear more from her. Or maybe you feel like this was way too self-indulgent and you never want to hear from us on the same episode again. And that's fine too. You can drop me a note to goodwork@barrettbrooks.com. That's a line I keep open just for podcast listeners, and it allows me to kind of batch everything in one place. So drop me a note there. Let me know what you thought about this one. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next episode.